Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will begin Village Affairs by Miss Reed. Part 1. The Rumors Fly. Chapter 1. Forebodings. It is an undisputed fact that people who choose to live in the country must expect to be caught up willy-nilly in the cycle of the seasons. Spring cleaning is done to the accompaniment of the rattle of tractors as they drill up and down the bare fields outside. Lambs bleat, cuckoos cry, blackbirds scold inquisitive cats, while upstairs the sufferers from spring influenza call hoarsely for cold drinks. Summer brings its own background of sights and sounds, and the pace of village life quickens as fetes follow cricket matches and outings, tennis parties and picnics crowd the calendar. There's not quite so much junketing in the autumn, for a harvest takes pride of place, and both men and women are busy storing and preserving, filling the barns and the pantry shelves. It is almost a relief to get to winter, to put away the lawnmower, to burn the garden rubbish, and to watch the plows at work turning the bright corn stubble into dark chocolate ribs ready for winter planting, while the rooks and peewits flutter behind, sometimes joined by seagulls when the weather is cruel elsewhere. For each of us in the country, our own particular pattern of life forms but a small part against the general background of the seasons. If you are a schoolmistress, as I am, then the three terms echo in miniature the rural world outside. The Christmas term brings the arrival of new children to the school, harvest festival, and, of course, the excitement of Christmas itself. The spring term is usually the coldest and the most germ-ridden, but catkins and primroses bring hope of better times, and summer itself is the crown of the year. It is good to have this recurring rhythm, this familiar shape of the year. We know, to some extent, what to expect, what to welcome, what to avoid. But there is another aspect of country life which is not so steady. There are certain topics which crop up again and again, not to be sure as rhythmically as primroses and harvest, but often enough over the years to give us a little jolt of recognition. There is the matter of the village hall, for instance. Is it needed or not needed? And then there is the parlous state of the church organ and its eternal fund. And Mrs. So-and-so is expecting again for the 12th, or is it 13th time, and something must be done about her house, or her husband, or both. It is rather like watching a roundabout at a fair. The galloping horses whirl by, nostrils flaring, tails streaming, and then suddenly there is an ostrich, strange and exotic in its plumage among the everyday beasts. The merry-go-round twirls onward, and we begin to sink back again into our pleasant lethargy when, yet again, the ostrich appears and our interest is quickened once more. So it is with these topics which disappear for a time whilst we are engrossed with everyday living, and then reappear to become the chief matters of importance, our talking points, things which have startled us from our normal apathy and quickened our senses. Just such a recurring topic is the possible closure of Fairacre School. I have been headmistress here for a number of years, and talk of closing it has cropped up time and time again, diverting attention from the church organ fund and the village hall as surely as the ostrich does from the horses. Naturally, after a week or two, the excitement dies down, and we continue as before with feelings of relief until the next crisis arrives. The causes vary. The true difficulty is that our numbers at schools scarcely warrant 2 teachers. One-teacher schools are considered undesirable, rightly, I think, and have been closing steadily in this area. Every now and again, the word goes round that Fairacre School really only needs 1.5 teachers, and this half-teacher problem cannot be overcome, although one has the pleasing fancy that a great deal of ruler gnawing at county offices goes on while the matter is being given consideration. Usually, Providence steps in. A new family of 6 children appears and is joyously added to the roster. Cross parents refuse to send their young children by bus to the next village, or some other benign agency gets to work, and the matter of Fairacre's closure is shelved once more. I had become so used to the ostrich appearing that I confess I could scarcely distinguish him from the galloping horses. Until one evening, when Mr. Annett, the headmaster of neighboring Beech Green School, startled me with his disclosures. As well as being a headmaster, George Annett is choirmaster and organist for St. Patrick's, Fairacre. On Friday evenings, he drives over from Beech Green, a distance of some 3 miles, to officiate at choir practice. For a small village, we have quite a flourishing choir. 2 of the stalwarts are Mr. Willett, part-time caretaker of the school, sexton, gravedigger, and general handyman to the whole village, and Mrs. Pringle, our lugubrious school cleaner, whose booming contralto has been heard for long, far too long, according to the ribald young choirsters, resounding among the rafters of St. Patrick's roof. On this particular Friday, George Annett called at the schoolhouse, where I was busy putting away the week's groceries and trying to recover from the stunning amount I appeared to owe for about 10 everyday items. "Have a drink," I said. "I reckon I need a brandy when I see the price of butter this week." "A spot of sherry would be fine," said George. "Not too much. Can't arrive at church smelling of alcohol, or Mrs. P. will have something to say." "Mrs. Pringle," I told him with feeling, "always has something to say, and usually something unpleasant. That woman positively invites assault and battery." "Heard the latest rumor? It's that my school is being enlarged." "I've heard that before. And Fairacre is closing, I suppose?" George studied his sherry, ignoring my flippancy. His grave face sobered me. "It rather looks like it. The chap from the office is coming out next week to see me. Don't know why yet, but this rumor has reached me from several sources, and I believe something's in the wind. How many children do you have at the moment?" "We're down to 28. Pat Smith has 15 infants. I have the rest. Incidentally, she's going at the end of term, so we're in the throes of getting a new appointment." "No easy task." "No, I expect we'll have to make do with a number of supply teachers until next term when the girls are appointed from college." George Annett put down his glass and rose to his feet. "Well, I'll let you know more when I've seen Davis next week. I can't say I want a bigger school. We'll have the upheaval of new building going on and a lot of disgruntled parents who don't want their children moved away. Not to mention disgruntled out-of-work teachers. You won't be out of work for long," he smiled. "Perhaps you'll be drafted to Beech Green?" "And where should I live? No doubt the school and the schoolhouse would be sold together pretty quickly, and I certainly can't afford to buy either. I'm going to need a sub from the needlework tin as it is to pay for this week's groceries." George laughed and departed. I might have ignored this rumor, as I had so many others, if it had not been for Mrs. Pringle. She arrived at the schoolhouse on Saturday morning with a nice plump chicken of her own rearing in the black oilcloth bag which accompanies her everywhere. "Have a cup of coffee with me," I invited. "Don't mind if I do," replied Mrs. Pringle graciously. I recalled a forthright friend who used to reply to this lackluster acceptance by saying, "And I don't mind if you don't." But naturally I was too cowardly to copy her. I took the tray into the garden, Mrs. Pringle following with the biscuit tin. Spring at Fairacre is pure bliss, and I gazed fondly at the apple blossom, the daffodils, and the pink haze of copper beech in tiny leaf. "See, you've got plenty of bindweed in your border," said Mrs. Pringle, bringing me back to earth with a jolt. "And twitch. No need to have twitch if your weed's regular." It sounded like some nervous complaint brought on by self-indulgence, a byproduct of alcoholism, perhaps, or drug addiction. However, the sun was warm, the coffee fragrant, and I did not intend to let Mrs. Pringle deflect me from their enjoyment. "Have a biscuit," I suggested, pushing the tin toward her. She selected a chocolate bourbon and surveyed it with disapproval. "I used to be very partial to these until they doubled in price pretty nearly." Now I buy Osborne, just as nourishing and don't fatten you so much. At least so Dr. Martin says when he give me my diet sheet. A diet sheet? Yes, I'm to lose 3 stone. No starch, no sugar, no fat, and no alcohol, though the last no hardship, considering I signed the pledge as a child. Then should you be eating that biscuit and drinking coffee with cream in it? I'm starting tomorrow, said Mrs. Pringle, taking a swift bite at the biscuit. I see. You've heard about our school shutting, I suppose, said the lady, her diction somewhat blurred with biscuit crumbs. Frequently. No, the latest. My cousin at Beech Green says they're going to build on to Mr. Annett's school and send our lot over there in a bus. Won't suit some of them. A vague feeling of disquiet ran through me. Mrs. Pringle was so often right. I remembered other dark warnings, airily dismissed by me, which had proved correct as time went by. Mrs. Pringle dusted some crumbs from her massive chest. Some seems to think the infants will stay here, she went on, but I say to Florrie, that's my cousin at Beech Green, and a flighty one she used to be as a girl, but has steadied down wonderful now she's got 8 children. I said to her, as straight as I'm saying to you now, Miss Reed, what call would the office have to keep open all that great school for a handful of 5s to 7s? Don't make sense, I said, and I repeat it now. It just don't make sense. No, indeed, I agreed weakly. Take the heatin', continued Mrs. Pringle, now in full spate. She held out a large hand as though offering me the 2 tortoise stoves in the palm. Sacks of good coke them stoves need during the winter, not to mention black lead and brushes and a cinder pail. They all takes us taxpayers' money. Then there's brooms and dusters and bar soap and floor cloths, which cost a small fortune. And all the books, of course, I broke in. Well, yes, said Mrs. Pringle doubtfully. I suppose they need books. She spoke as though such aids to learning were wholly irrelevant in a school, a very small beard compared with such things as scrubbing brushes and other tools of her trade. But stands to reason, she continued, that it's cheaper for all the whole boiling to go on to bus in Beech Green, but what the petrol costs these days to trundle 'em back and forth, I shudders to think. Well, it may not happen yet, I said, as lightly as I could. We've had these scaremongering tales before. Maybe, said Mrs. Pringle, rising majestically and adjusting the black oilcloth bag over her arm. But this time I've heard it from a good many folks, and what have our numbers at Fairacre ever been so low? I don't like it, Miss Reed. I feels in my bones a preposition. My mother, God rest her, had second sight, and I sometimes think I take after her. I devoutly hoped that Mrs. Pringle's premonition meant nothing, but could not help feeling uneasy as I accompanied her to the gate. You wants to get rid of that bindweed, she said, as a parting shot, before it takes over. That woman, I thought savagely as I collected our cups, always has the last word. By Monday morning, my qualms had receded back into the background, as they so often had before. In any case, everyday problems of the classroom successfully ousted any future threats. Patrick had been entrusted with a £1 note for his dinner money and had lost it on the way. He was tearful, fearing awful retribution from his mother. It was in my pocket, he sniffed, mopping his tears with the back of his hand. All scrunched up it was with these here. He produced 4 marbles, a stub of pencil, a gray lump of bubble gum, and a jagged piece of red glass. You'll cut yourself on that, I said. Put it in the wastepaper basket. He looked at me in alarm. A fat tear coursed unnoticed down his cheek. But it's off of my brother's rear lamp, he protested. Well, put it in this piece of paper to take home, I said, giving in, and put all that rubbish on the side table. Now think, Patrick, did you take the £1 note out of your pocket on the way? Yes, he did, miss, chorused the class. He showed it to me, said Linda Moffat. He said he betted I didn't have as much money. That's right, agreed Ernest, and it was windy, blowing about like a flag it was. I bet it's blown over the hedge. And some old cow's eaten it, or some old tramp's picked it up, or some old bird's got it in its nest. At these helpful surmises, Patrick's tears flowed afresh. You must go back over your tracks, Patrick, and search, I told him, and someone had better go with him. 2 pairs of eyes are better than 1. Silence descended upon the class. Arms were folded, chest stuck out, and expressions of intense capability transformed the countenances of all present. What could be better than escaping from the classroom into the windy lane outside? Ernest, I said at last. There was a gust of expelled air from those waiting lungs and a general slumping of disappointed forms. Ernest and Patrick hastened from the room joyfully, almost knocking over Joseph Coggs, who was entering with a bunch of bedraggled narcissi. He looked bemused. "I've been and brought you some flowers," he said, holding them up. "My auntie brought them on Saturday, but my mum says they'll only get knocked over, so you can have them." "Well, thank you. Fetch a vase." When he returned, I added, "You're late, you know, Joseph." His lower lip began to droop, and I feared that we should have yet another pupil in tears. "A policeman come," he said. Everyone looked up. Here was real drama. "From Caxley," faltered Joseph. Bright glances were exchanged. This was better still. "He wanted to see my dad, but he was in bed. My mum give me these flowers and said to clear off while she got Dad up. The policeman's waiting in our kitchen." "Well, there's no point worrying about that," I said reassuringly. "Your mother and father will see to it." The class looked disappointed at the dismissal of such an enthralling subject. What spoil sports teachers are, to be sure. By the time prayers had been said, a hymn sung, and the rest of the pupils' dinner money safely gathered into my OXO tin, the hands of the great wall clock stood at 10:15. Patrick and Ernest were still at large in the village, and no doubt enjoying every minute of it. "We're having a mental arithmetic test this morning," I announced amid a few stifled groans, "and I shall want someone to give out the paper." At that moment there was a cry from the back of the room, and Eileen Burton stumbled down the aisle with a bloodied handkerchief clapped to her streaming nose. This is a frequent occurrence, and we all know what to do. "Lay down, girl," shouted one. I should like to have given, not for the first time, a short lecture on the use of the verbs to lie and to lay, but circumstances were against me. As it was, I fetched the box of paper handkerchiefs and assisted the child to a prone position by the stove. "Shall I get cold water? Does she need a cushion, miss? She wants a bit of metal down her neck, miss." I fetched the cutting-out scissors, a hefty chunk of cold steel, and put them at the back of her neck, substituting at the same time a wad of paper tissues for the deplorable handkerchief. Eileen remained calm throughout, accustomed to this routine. We left her there and set about the test. "Numbers down to 20, I told them. Would we never get started? There was a clanging noise as feet trampled over the iron scraper in the lobby. Ernest and Patrick entered, wind-blown and triumphant. Patrick holding aloft a very dirty pound note. "We found it, miss," they cried. "Guess where?" "In the hedge." "No." "In the duck pond?" shouted someone, putting down his pen. "No." "In your pocket after all?" "No." By now pens were abandoned, and it was plain that the mental arithmetic test would be indefinitely postponed unless I took a firm hand. "That's enough. Tell us where." "In a cowpat. So stuck up it was it couldn't blow away. Weren't it lucky?" They thrust the noisome object under my nose. "Wipe it," I said faintly, "with a damp cloth in the lobby, then bring it back. Don't let go of it for 1 second. Understand?" By now it was 10:15 and no work done. "First question," I said briskly. Pens were picked up amidst sighing. "If a man has 12 chickens," I began when the door opened. "And about time, too," I said wrathfully, expecting Ernest and Patrick to appear. "Get into your desks and let's get some work done." The mild face of the vicar appeared, and we all rose in some confusion. News, Chapter 2, News of Minnie Pringle. The Reverend Gerald Partridge has been vicar of this parish for many years. I have yet to hear anyone, even the most censorious chapel-goer, speak ill of him. He goes about his parish duties conscientiously, vague in his manner, but wonderfully alert to those who have need of his sympathy and wisdom. In winter, he is a striking figure, tramping the lanes in an ancient cape of dramatic cut and sporting a pair of leopard skin gloves so old that he is accompanied by little clouds of molting fur wherever he uses his hands. It is commonly believed that they must have been a gift from some loving and possibly beloved churchgoer in the living before he came to Fairacre. Why otherwise would he cling to such dilapidated articles? Fairacre School is a Church of England school, standing close to St. Patrick's and the vicarage. The vicar is a frequent visitor, and although I have heard the ruder boys mimicking him behind his back, the children are extremely fond of him, and I have witnessed them attacking a stranger who once dared to criticize him. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I was just passing and thought I would have a word with you." "Of course." I turned to the class. "Turn over your test papers and write out the 12 times table," I directed. Long-suffering glances were exchanged. Trust her to want the 12 times. One of the nastiest, that was. Their looks spoke volumes. "What on earth is the matter with that child?" asked the vicar in a shocked tone, his horrified gaze upon the prone and bloodied figure of Eileen Burton. "Just a nosebleed," I said soothingly. "She often has them." "But you should have a key," cried Mr. Partridge, much agitated. "A large key to put at the nape of the neck." "She's got the cutting-out scissors," I began, but he was now too worried to heed such interruptions. "My mother always kept a large key hanging in the kitchen for this sort of thing. We had a parlor maid once just so afflicted. What about the key of the school door? Or shall I run back to the vicarage for the vestry key? It must weigh quite 2 pounds and would be ideal for the purpose." His face puckered with concern, his voice sharp with anxiety. At that moment, Eileen stood up, dropped the paper handkerchief in the wastebasket, and smiled broadly. "Over," she announced, and put the scissors on my desk. "Take care, dear child, take care," cried the vicar, but he sounded greatly relieved at this discovery. He picked up the cutting-out scissors. "A worthy substitute," he conceded, "but it would be as well to get Willett to screw a hook into the side of one of the cupboards for a key. I can provide you with one quite as massive as this, I can assure you, and I really should feel happier if you had one on the premises." I thanked him and asked what it was he wanted to tell me. "Simply a rumor about the school closing. I wanted you to know that I have had no official message about such a possibility. I pray that I may never have one, but should it be so, please rest assured that I should let you know at once." "Thank you, I know you would." "You have heard nothing?" "Only rumors. They fly around so often I don't let them bother me unduly." Quite. Well, I must be off. Mrs. Partridge asked me to pick up something at the post office, but for the life of me, I can't remember what it is. I wonder if I should go back and ask." "No doubt Mr. Lamb will know and have it waiting for you," I suggested. Mr. Partridge smiled with relief. "I'm sure you're right. I will call there first. No point in worrying my wife unnecessarily." He waved it to the children and made for the door. "I won't forget to look out for a suitable key," he promised. "My mother would have approved of having one handy all the time. First aid, you know." The door closed behind him. "First question," I said. "If a man had 12 chickens..." Well, you'll have time to do your homework before the next reading. Good night.